How to master your negative emotions and build your true self. What if the very emotions you have been taught to suppress, anger, fear, sadness, were not signs of weakness, but raw materials of your strength? Imagine for a moment that the chaos inside you is not an enemy to be eliminated, but a hidden architecture designed to shape resilience and reveal truth. Every negative emotion you feel carries a message. Yet most people run from these messages, numbing themselves with distraction or burying them under forced positivity, never realizing that they are abandoning the very compass that could guide them to their true self. Modern psychology makes this clear. Emotions are not random storms. They are signals coded with meaning. Cognitive behavioral therapy shows us that behind every negative emotion there is a thought, often distorted, that shapes perception and behavior. When you learn to decode those thoughts, the emotion ceases to control you and begins to inform you. Neuroscience confirms what the Stoics once intuited. Negative emotions are part of a feedback system that, if mastered, creates stability and clarity. Andrew Huberman reminds us that even the physiological intensity of anger or fear is not permanent. It is a temporary cascade of chemicals, dopamine, cortisol, adrenaline, signals you can learn to regulate rather than obey. Joe Dispenza goes further, showing how repetition of emotional states literally rewires the brain. If you live in anger, your identity becomes anger. If you live in fear, your body becomes conditioned to expect it. But if you confront, reshape, and reframe these states, your brain begins to reconfigure itself toward resilience and clarity. Neuroplasticity is proof that you are not condemned to repeat your past reactions. You are capable of sculpting a new self through how you respond to what you feel. Philosophy anticipated this long before science. Descartes urged us to doubt appearances in search of clarity. And what is a negative emotion, if not an appearance that demands examination? Marcus Aurelius reminded himself that you have power over your mind, not outside events, anchoring his resilience in perception rather than circumstance. Montaigne turned inward, insisting that to understand others, one must first understand the depths of the self. Together, these voices converge on a single truth. Your negative emotions are not the end of you. They are the beginning of transformation. This journey is about learning to master, not erase, your inner storms. Because the authentic self is not built in the absence of struggle, but through the way you meet it. If you want clarity, strength, and resilience, you cannot escape anger, fear, or sadness. You must face them, master them, and allow them to shape the truest version of who you are. The secret life of negative emotions. Anger, fear, sadness. Most people see these emotions as destructive forces to suppress or avoid. But what if they were not here to ruin you, but to reveal you? Negative emotions are not accidents. They are ancient survival tools coded into your biology, each with a function that has been misinterpreted by modern culture. Anger alerts you when your boundaries are violated. Fear prepares your body for protection and sharpened awareness. Sadness slows you down, forcing you to process loss and realign with what matters. They are not punishments, they are guides. Neuroscience explains that these emotions are rooted in adaptive circuits of the brain. The amygdala detects threat, the hypothalamus triggers hormonal cascades, and neurotransmitters like cortisol and adrenaline prepare you for action. Without them, humanity would never have survived. Yet the problem today is not their existence, but our relationship with them. We treat them as enemies to silence, when in reality, they are signals meant to be decoded. Psychology reinforces this view. Daniel Goleman showed that emotional intelligence begins with recognition, naming what you feel instead of being consumed by it. Jordan Peterson emphasizes that confronting chaos directly is the only path to order. When you turn toward your negative emotions instead of away, you reclaim authority over them. Avoidance breeds weakness. Confrontation builds strength. Philosophy saw the same truth centuries earlier. Marcus Aurelius faced the turbulence of his mind daily and wrote that emotions themselves are not the problem, but the judgments attached to them. Descartes would insist that clarity comes not from denying experience, but from questioning its meaning. By doing so, what once appeared as chaos transforms into structured knowledge. The secret life of negative emotions is this: they are not obstacles to your true self. They are the raw material from which it is forged. To suppress them is to throw away the instructions your own body and mind are offering. To master them is to begin the journey toward resilience, clarity, and authenticity. Emotions as maps, not monsters. Every emotion you feel is a map. It is a signal pointing towards something important in your inner or outer world. Anger marks where your boundaries have been crossed. Fear signals that your safety, whether physical or psychological, may be threatened. Sadness reveals the weight of loss or disconnection, urging you to slow down and realign. Yet most people misread these maps, treating emotions as monsters to be suppressed rather than messages to be followed. By doing this, they lose the opportunity to understand themselves more deeply. Psychology makes this clear. Cognitive behavioral therapy shows that emotions follow thoughts, and those thoughts often emerge from hidden beliefs or unmet needs. When an emotion rises, it is not random. It is a flare shot into the sky by your mind, demanding your attention. Ignoring it doesn't erase it. It simply pushes the message deeper, where it festers and grows. Mastery begins when you stop fighting emotions and start listening to them. Neuroscience confirms that emotions are fast, automatic responses designed to guide behavior before conscious thought even catches up. Andrew Huberman points out that the body reacts in milliseconds. Heart rate, breathing, and pupil dilation shift, long before the mind explains what is happening. Emotions are the body's compass, orienting you toward action. The mistake is not that they exist. The mistake is in misreading their direction. Philosophy anticipated this framework. Aristotle spoke of virtue as finding balance, treating emotions not as enemies but as forces to be guided by reason. The Stoics believed emotions could become wise teachers if approached with clarity. Montaigne, through his essays, reminded us that to understand life, we must be willing to study ourselves in all states, especially the uncomfortable ones. When you see emotions as maps, they no longer paralyze you. They begin to show you the terrain of your values, your fears, your desires. Instead of monsters lurking in the shadows, they become guides leading you toward a truer, more structured self. The question is no longer, how do I get rid of this feeling? But what is this feeling trying to show me about who I am? The neurochemistry of the storm. Inside every surge of anger, every wave of fear, every cloud of sadness, there is a biological storm unfolding with perfect precision. Your emotions are not abstract. They are rooted in chemistry and electricity, firing through circuits designed to keep you alive. When you feel threatened, the amygdala activates like an alarm system, releasing cortisol and adrenaline, preparing your body to fight or flee. When sadness settles in, serotonin levels dip, slowing thought and action so you can reflect and heal. Even dopamine, often linked with pleasure, shifts its role under stress, influencing your drive to escape pain or search for relief. Neuroscience reveals that these storms are not permanent. Andrew Huberman explains that emotions are waves of physiological states, often lasting only 90 seconds if left unresisted. It is our thoughts, rumination, replay, self-criticism that extend the storm into hours or even days. By learning to regulate breathing, posture, and focus, you can reduce the chemical intensity and regain control. The body responds directly to these interventions, pulling you back from chaos into clarity. Psychology confirms this. Daniel Goleman's work on emotional intelligence shows that awareness of these processes is the first step toward mastery. Cognitive behavioral therapy provides the tools to interrupt the feedback loop between thought and chemistry, breaking the cycle of spiraling emotions. When you recognize the storm as a chemical event rather than an eternal truth, its power over you diminishes. Philosophy hinted at this long ago. The Stoics taught that emotions are not to be feared, but observed, reminding us that nothing external can truly harm the mind, unless the mind consents. Descartes would insist on stepping back from the storm, doubting its permanence, seeking clarity in the midst of turbulence. The neurochemistry of the storm shows us that emotions are not destiny. They are temporary states, chemical signals flowing through your body, waiting for you to guide them. When you learn to ride the storm instead of resisting it, you stop being a prisoner of biology and become the commander of your own inner weather. CBT's mirror, thoughts that sculpt feelings. Every negative emotion begins with a thought, often so fast and automatic that you don't notice it. Cognitive behavioral therapy calls these automatic thoughts, and they act like invisible architects shaping the way you feel. An insult triggers the thought, "I am not respected," and anger rises. A failure triggers, "I am not good enough," and sadness grows. A risk triggers, "I will lose everything," and fear takes hold. The emotion feels overwhelming, but at its root is a belief, a perception, a judgment. And when you learn to identify and reshape that judgment, the emotion transforms. Psychology proves that thoughts and feelings are not separate. They are partners. By questioning distorted thoughts, CBT teaches you to challenge the stories you tell yourself. Instead of "I always fail," the reframed thought becomes, "This setback is a lesson, not a verdict." The emotion shifts from despair to determination. Instead of "Nobody understands me," the reframe becomes, "I can express my needs more clearly," and loneliness gives way to courage. This is the mirror of CBT. It shows you that your emotions reflect the thoughts you choose to accept. Neuroscience supports this process. Repeated thoughts strengthen neural pathways, hardwiring emotional responses into habits. Joe Dispenza calls this living in a memorized state, your brain and body conditioned to feel the same way over and over. But when you interrupt the loop with conscious reframing, neuroplasticity allows new circuits to form. Over time, your brain learns to default to resilience instead of despair, to clarity instead of chaos. Philosophy anticipated this practice. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself daily that external events cannot harm the soul. Only his interpretation could. Descartes urged clarity through radical doubt, questioning not only the world outside, but the beliefs inside. Montaigne insisted that true wisdom is the courage to observe oneself honestly, to see the inner patterns at work. CBT's mirror is the proof that you are not at the mercy of your emotions. You are the sculptor of your inner world. The way you interpret events determines the shape of your feelings, and by reshaping your thoughts, you carve a stronger, truer version of yourself. The Stoic pause. In the instant when anger rises, when fear grips, when sadness threatens to pull you under, there exists a moment so small that most people miss it. The Stoics called this the space between stimulus and response. Marcus Aurelius practiced it daily, reminding himself that while he could not control events, he could always control his reaction. That pause, even if it lasts only a breath, is the point where mastery begins. Neuroscience confirms what ancient philosophy taught. When you pause, you interrupt the amygdala's automatic flood of signals and engage the prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain responsible for logic, planning, and self-regulation. Andrew Huberman explains that even 2 deep breaths can lower physiological arousal, slow the heart, and reset attention. The pause is not weakness. It is a neurological reset that transforms reaction into choice. Psychology echoes the same principle. Cognitive behavioral therapy teaches clients to identify the gap between thought and behavior. Instead of exploding in anger or collapsing into despair, you insert reflection. You ask, "What am I feeling? What thought is fueling this? What outcome do I want?" That pause allows the emotional storm to shift from unconscious reaction to conscious direction. Philosophy gives the pause its deeper meaning. Seneca called anger a kind of temporary madness, cured by restraint. Descartes sought clarity by stepping back from immediate impressions, doubting them until reason could discern truth. The pause is this principle in action. It is the refusal to be enslaved by the first surge of emotion, choosing instead to act from strength. The Stoic pause is not passive. It is the most active form of control. It is the sword that cuts the chain of reactivity, the bridge that carries you from chaos to clarity. Every time you practice it, you strengthen your capacity to master emotions, and in doing so, you reinforce the foundation of your true self. Turning pain into energy. Pain is unavoidable. The loss of someone you love, the sting of failure, the frustration of rejection. These experiences carve into you with a sharpness that feels unbearable. Most people try to numb it, suppress it, or run from it. But pain, when faced directly, is not only survivable, it is convertible. It holds energy that, if redirected, can become the fuel for growth, creativity, and resilience. What seems like the weight that crushes you can become the weight that strengthens you. Neuroscience explains that emotional pain activates the same neural pathways as physical pain. The brain interprets heartbreak, shame, or loss through circuits in the anterior cingulate cortex, releasing stress chemicals like cortisol. But here is the key. What you do with that state determines whether it breaks you or builds you. If you spiral into avoidance, the pain becomes chronic suffering. If you confront it and reframe it, you trigger new neurochemical patterns: dopamine to pursue solutions, serotonin to restore balance, endorphins to bring relief. The pain itself becomes the spark for transformation. Psychology supports this alchemy. Cognitive behavioral therapy teaches that meaning is the lever that shifts pain into progress. A thought like, "This proves I am worthless," creates paralysis, while "This is showing me what I must change," creates momentum. Jordan Peterson often notes that suffering without meaning is hell, but suffering with meaning is bearable, and even redemptive. Philosophy has echoed this for centuries. The Stoics embraced discomfort as training for the soul, Seneca writing that difficulty strengthens resolve the way fire tempers steel. Montaigne reflected that pain reveals our deepest truths, stripping away illusions and forcing us to confront who we are. Aristotle believed that virtue itself is forged in the arena of struggle, not comfort. Turning pain into energy means refusing to waste your suffering. It is choosing to channel it into action, art, growth, or clarity. It is the decision to let every wound become a well of strength. In this way, pain is no longer an obstacle to your true self, but the very forge in which it is created. The body as an emotional compass. Long before the mind begins to label what you feel, the body has already spoken. A tight chest, a clenched jaw, a racing heart, shallow breath. These are not random discomforts. They are signals, the body's first language of emotion. Neuroscience shows that emotions begin in the body before they are translated into thoughts. The interoceptive system, which monitors your internal state, detects changes in heart rate, tension, or breathing, and sends them to the brain, shaping how you interpret the world around you. Andrew Huberman explains that physiology drives psychology as much as the other way around. When you recognize the bodily cues of fear or anger, you gain the chance to intervene before the emotion hijacks your thoughts. Slow breathing, softening posture, or grounding your gaze are not trivial tricks. They directly regulate the autonomic nervous system, reducing cortisol and adrenaline, restoring clarity. The body becomes the first tool of emotional mastery. Psychology builds on this truth. Somatic therapies and CBT techniques both emphasize awareness of the body as a gateway to self-regulation. By asking, "Where do I feel this in my body?" you move the emotion from vague chaos into observable detail. That act alone creates distance between you and the storm. You stop drowning in emotion and begin steering through it. Philosophy hinted at this wisdom centuries ago. The Stoics valued physical discipline as the foundation of mental clarity. Descartes, often misread as separating mind and body, actually saw the body as the seat of sensation that informs reason. Montaigne reminded us that self-knowledge requires listening not just to thought, but to the rhythms of the flesh. The body as an emotional compass reframes mastery. It means your emotions are not abstract mysteries locked in your head. They are tangible, physical signals that can be observed, guided, and calmed. When you learn to read this compass, you stop being blindsided by emotions and begin navigating them with precision. Descartes' razor of clarity. In moments of emotional chaos, it is easy to accept every feeling as absolute truth. Fear whispers that danger is certain. Anger insists that injustice is undeniable. Sadness declares that nothing will change. But René Descartes taught a discipline of doubt, a method of cutting through confusion until only what is clear and undeniable remains. This principle can be turned inward, applied like a razor to your emotions. Ask, is this feeling reality, or is it perception filtered through my current state of mind? Neuroscience shows us that emotions are rapid interpretations of stimuli, not flawless reports of reality. The amygdala reacts first, scanning for threat, while the prefrontal cortex comes later, bringing analysis and perspective. If you act only on the first surge, you mistake perception for truth. But if you pause and question, if you apply Descartes' razor, you activate higher circuits that reorganize the chaos into clarity. Andrew Huberman reminds us that redirecting attention literally reshapes neural firing patterns, giving you control over what once felt automatic. Psychology echoes this approach. Cognitive behavioral therapy trains you to challenge distortions, all-or-nothing thinking, catastrophizing, overgeneralization. These distortions make emotions heavier than they are. By questioning them, you strip away the illusion. Instead of, "This always happens to me," the razor cuts it down to, "This happened now, and I have choices about how to respond." That shift dismantles the false weight of the emotion, leaving only the truth you can act on. Philosophy offers the same wisdom. The Stoics urged skepticism toward first impressions, teaching that clarity emerges when you separate fact from interpretation. Montaigne observed that our minds often invent fears greater than reality, and that by examining them, we shrink them back to their true size. Descartes' razor of clarity is the act of cutting away the fog of assumption, distortion, and panic until only what is solid remains. In doing so, emotions cease to be tyrants and become advisors. They still speak, but you choose how much authority their voice deserves. This is not suppression, it is precision, the kind of clarity that builds an unshakable self. Emotional alchemy in relationships. Negative emotions often erupt most intensely within relationships. A sharp word, a forgotten promise, a misinterpreted look. Suddenly anger, fear, or resentment take the stage. Most people let these emotions corrode trust, but empathy and awareness can turn them into something different. Emotional alchemy is the art of transforming raw conflict into deeper connection, using the very energy of negative emotions to build stronger bonds. Psychology explains that conflict rarely stems from the surface issue. Beneath the argument about chores or schedules lies something deeper, a need for respect, recognition, safety, or love. When you recognize the emotion underneath, your own and the others, you shift the conversation from attack to understanding. Cognitive behavioral therapy helps by reframing not just what you feel, but what you assume about the other person's intent. This shift prevents escalation and opens the door to resolution. Neuroscience reveals that empathy during conflict changes brain chemistry for both people. When one person listens and mirrors back understanding, oxytocin is released, lowering defenses and increasing trust. Andrew Huberman points out that attention itself is a neurobiological gift. When you focus fully on someone, you signal safety, and their nervous system calms. This is why listening with empathy feels like medicine. It changes the body as much as the mind. Philosophy anticipated this dynamic. Aristotle argued that friendship and community are built not on constant agreement, but on the virtue of understanding and goodwill. The Stoics taught that conflict is an opportunity to practice patience and justice. Montaigne reflected that true connection requires embracing the imperfections of others as mirrors of our own. Emotional alchemy means you stop letting negative emotions destroy the fabric of relationships and start letting them refine it. Anger can reveal boundaries that need to be respected. Fear can expose insecurities that need reassurance. Sadness can draw people closer in shared vulnerability. When you master this art, relationships stop being fragile under pressure and become the very forge where trust, respect, and intimacy are strengthened. Neuroplasticity and emotional identity. Every repeated emotional reaction leaves a trace in the brain. Neuroscience calls this neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to rewire itself based on repeated experiences. If anger is your default response, the pathways that fire with anger grow stronger, until reacting with rage feels automatic. If fear dominates your choices, circuits of avoidance become reinforced, and fear becomes your identity. Over time, you stop noticing the difference between what you feel and who you think you are. But the truth is this: emotions do not define you, they train you. And with awareness, you can retrain them. Andrew Huberman explains that attention is the lever of neuroplasticity. Whatever you repeatedly focus on becomes your brain's priority, carving new circuits and weakening old ones. Joe Dispenza expands on this by showing how emotional states, when rehearsed long enough, condition the body to live in the past, repeating cycles of anger, guilt, or despair as if they were permanent truths. Yet the same mechanism that imprisons you can liberate you. By practicing new responses, calm breathing in the face of fear, reframing thoughts in moments of frustration, you begin to build new neural highways. The brain reorganizes itself around resilience. Psychology provides the tools for this reprogramming. CBT reframes thought patterns, gradually shifting emotional defaults. Emotional intelligence training strengthens awareness and regulation, replacing reactivity with intentionality. With consistent practice, the old self built on negative cycles dissolves, and a new self emerges, one forged by deliberate mastery of emotions. Philosophy pointed to this centuries before neuroscience gave it language. Aristotle believed that character is nothing more than repeated action becoming habit. Marcus Aurelius disciplined himself daily to redirect his thoughts, shaping a resilient self through practice. Montaigne's reflections remind us that identity is not fixed, but continuously rewritten by how we engage with our experiences. Neuroplasticity shows that mastery of emotions is not about perfection, but practice. Every choice to respond differently rewires your brain, reshapes your patterns, and redefines your identity. You are not condemned to repeat the self that pain and chaos created. You are free to build the self that clarity and resilience demand. The shadow self-integration. There are parts of yourself you avoid, deny, or even despise. The flashes of envy, the bursts of anger, the moments of insecurity you try to bury deep. Carl Jung called this the shadow, the collection of traits we refuse to acknowledge. Yet what you push away does not disappear. It lingers, leaking through reactions, sabotaging choices, and distorting relationships. Mastery of negative emotions is impossible without turning toward this shadow, because hidden within it are lessons that complete you. Psychology shows that repressing emotions intensifies them. CBT teaches that what you refuse to examine gains power, while what you confront loses its grip. When you shine awareness on envy, you may find unrecognized desires. When you explore anger, you may uncover boundaries you've never set. When you acknowledge fear, you expose the values you most want to protect. The shadow is not your enemy. It is a mirror showing what you must integrate to become whole. Neuroscience supports this idea. Suppressed emotions trigger chronic stress responses, keeping cortisol levels high and rewiring the brain toward hypervigilance. By facing and reframing them, you reduce this physiological burden and create space for new neural patterns. Joe Dispenza emphasizes that when you bring unconscious states into awareness, you reclaim energy previously trapped in suppression, energy you can then use to design a stronger identity. Philosophy, too, speaks of integration. Marcus Aurelius wrote that everything human is not foreign to him, Accepting the full range of the human condition, Montaigne believed that self-reflection meant embracing the contradictions within us rather than hiding them. Descartes sought clarity by confronting doubt, proving that facing the unsettling is the only way to arrive at truth. Integrating the shadow self is the act of pulling fragmented pieces of who you are back into unity. It is not about indulging destructive impulses, but understanding their origin and converting their energy into wisdom. By doing so, you stop living as a divided self and begin embodying authenticity. The negative emotions you once feared become signals. The shadow you once denied becomes strength, and your true self emerges, whole, resilient, and unshakable. The rebirth of the true self. When you no longer run from your emotions, when you learn to face anger without being consumed by it, to feel fear without being paralyzed, to walk through sadness without being broken, something extraordinary happens. You are reborn. The fragments of yourself that once seemed contradictory, strength and fragility, clarity and confusion, light and shadow, begin to fuse into a unified whole. This is the moment when negative emotions stop defining you and start refining you. Neuroscience shows that every new response to emotion reshapes the brain. Each pause, each reframed thought, each act of awareness lays down new pathways, wiring resilience into your identity. Joe Dispenza reminds us that by choosing new emotional states, you condition both brain and body to anticipate a different future. The old self, wired to repeat cycles of suffering, gives way to a self designed by deliberate choice. Psychology reinforces this truth. Emotional intelligence is not the absence of pain, but the mastery of it, transforming raw reaction into thoughtful response. CBT proves that identity is not fixed by the past, but sculpted in the present by the beliefs you challenge and the patterns you create. You do not find your true self. You build it, one conscious choice at a time. Philosophy gives this process its eternal language. Aristotle taught that virtue is forged in repeated action. Marcus Aurelius insisted that obstacles are not interruptions to life, but the material of life itself. Descartes searched for clarity in doubt, discovering that truth is born from confronting uncertainty. Montaigne embraced the contradictions within himself as the essence of what it means to be human. The rebirth of the true self is not a single moment of revelation. It is the ongoing practice of meeting your emotions with courage, clarity, and structure. It is the decision to let pain become energy, to let fear become focus, to let anger become boundary, to let sadness become depth. The self that emerges from this practice is not fragile but unshakable, not lost in chaos but anchored in meaning. This is the self you are meant to embody, the self that masters storms and walks forward with resilience, clarity, and authenticity.